The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus told his disciples this parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out at dawn to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with them for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. Going out about 9 o'clock, the landowner saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and he said to them, "You too go into my vineyard, and I will give you what is just." So they went off. And he went out again around noon, and around 3 o'clock, and did likewise. Going out about 5 o'clock, the landowner found others standing around, and said to them, "Why do you stand here idle all day?" They answered, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You too go into my vineyard." When it was evening, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Summon the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and ending with the first." When those who had started about 5 o'clock came, each received the usual daily wage. So when the first came, they thought that they would receive more, but each of them also got the usual wage. And on receiving it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last ones worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who bore the day's burden and the heat." He said to one of them in reply, "My friend, I am not cheating you. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what is yours and go. What if I wish to give this last one the same as you? Or am I not free to do as I wish with my own money? Are you envious because I am generous? Thus the last will be first, and the first will be last." The Gospel of the Lord. An argument between Alessandro's father, Giovanni Serenelli, and the foreman, both the Goretti family and the Serenelli family, were fired. I butchered that beginning. Let me start that again. After an argument, because I want to make sure everybody knows who everybody is. After an argument between Alessandro's father, who is Giovanni Serenelli, and the foreman, the Goretti family and the Serenelli family were both fired from their positions. This occurred in the late 1800s, and they were sharecroppers. And as sharecroppers, what that meant at that time was it was very common for different families to live under one roof and work together on one farm that they were mutually renting for their sustenance. Now, this loss of employment happened at high season for them, which put them in a very desperate situation. In fact, they were so desperate, they had to go with the only option that they could find, which was then to relocate and move into the swamps. And the swamps were a dangerous area because they were totally engulfed by disease. And they found themselves now living among society's poorest. In fact, the move was so dangerous, it actually ended up costing Mr. Goretti his life because he contracts malaria from a mosquito while they're there, and therefore leaves his wife, Assunta Goretti, alone now with her 6 children to raise and to take care of the farm. So in order to make it all work, Assunta puts Maria, her oldest daughter, at the age of 9, in charge of her 5 other siblings for their education, as well as to care for the house and to cook, while she and Giovanni would go out into the farm and they would work it. Alessandro Serenelli, however, was a teenager at the time, and he started taking a dark fancy to Maria. A couple of years goes by, and he's been making advancements towards Maria, but Maria comes from a very strong Catholic family and has resisted him at every turn, but in secret because she was afraid to upset the dynamic between their families when they really needed this job. Eventually, when she was 11 years old, Alessandro, if he's not 20, he's like 18 or 19, he forces himself upon her. She fights back, and as a result of her efforts, he chokes her, and then he stabs her 14 times, resulting eventually in her death 24 hours later on account of her wounds. Now, Maria goes on to become a canonized saint as a virgin martyr in the life of the church. But Alessandro, as you can imagine, is rapidly heading in the complete other direction. Having been caught, however, Alessandro begins to blame everybody but himself. He blames his difficult upbringing for what happened. He blames Maria, saying that he was actually defending himself against her. He blames his situation. There's a lot of mental illness in his family. And every minute that goes by, it's like another wall goes up around his heart, just making it increasingly difficult for God to ever get in there, and increasingly unlikely. In the end, Alessandro's circumstances externally began to reflect his internal dispositions. He was locked away in prison, and he was sentenced to 30 years. And the only reason he didn't get worse was because Italian law considered the age of majority to be 21, so at the time, he was still considered a minor. But eventually, they had to, in the prison, move him into isolation because his anger would lead to these outbursts of violence against the other inmates. And what was clear at this time was that each outburst was just a confirmation that really, he's a man at war within himself, because he's unwilling to accept what for everybody else is an obvious truth. He did kill that girl. His life is forever forfeit. And, this is the most difficult, he deserves his sentence. Now, society on its part saw his situation, his sentence of 30 years, as the absolute least amount of suffering that this man deserved. They would have rather have seen him hanged. Because that's our sense of justice, right? I think a lot of times we feel that way when we see someone on the news like Cavalcante and say they should just kill that man and be done with it. But that's not how God thinks. When God says in Isaiah, "My ways are not your ways," which we heard in the first reading, it's not a commentary on God's intelligibility that we could just never comprehend. He is saying this to a people whose abominable sins have cost them everything, including their freedom. And yet, even in exile, which they clearly deserved, leading up to this line about his ways being above their ways, he's consoling them. It said, "Let the scoundrel forsake his way, and the wicked his thoughts. Let him turn to the Lord for mercy, to our God who is generous in forgiving. My thoughts are not your thoughts." So the Father Loomis translation of that would be, don't worry. Whatever you've done, my justice isn't like your justice. Even after all of it, I love you. But let me love you by coming to me. And I think that's a message that we need to hear. There are some decisions that we make in our life, we have made them, we will make them, we're making them now, that will cripple our relationship with God. And when that happens, we can feel it in our bones. And the temptation in that space is to do anything but admit it. We deny it, we blame other people, we blame our situation, we start putting fences up around our hearts to keep the truth out. That really, underneath it all, we have forfeited our relationship with God and are no longer worthy to be called his sons. That's what Alessandro was doing. Because we all do it to some extent. He's no exception to the rule. And what happens as a result of that is it takes us deeper and deeper into our own prison. And this is true even if our sin isn't all that great. You know, I've learned the more that I grow spiritually, the more patient I actually have to be with myself in my sinfulness. Because what happens to me is what happens to a lot of people. Even when we commit minor sins, we start to get discouraged. We think to ourselves, oh my goodness, I've confessed this 99 times already. Surely I've exhausted single-handedly God's mercy. And I can't go for 100th time and say that I did this again. I can already feel the look of disappointment. I can feel it. But is that how God really responds? What is God say when that happens to us? My justice isn't your justice. Let me love you. Don't take that opportunity away from me. Because if we don't let him love us, we end up shutting ourselves out of the Father's house. No one's doing it to us. We're doing it to ourselves. And we become like the older brother in the parable of the prodigal son, who was so scandalized at the father's mercy on his younger brother, who lived a debaucherous life, that he refused to enter into the Father's house to celebrate at his redemption and his return. And so he ends up excluding himself from the banquet. That's what Alessandro was doing. The one thing he needed, God's mercy, he refused to accept. That's the way it went. Until one day, in his cell, Maria Goretti appears to him. And she offers him 14 roses, each a gesture of forgiveness for the 14 stab wounds that she received at his hand. And immediately, as a result of this, he contacts the local bishop and he goes to confession and he just puts it all out there, every detail of every sin, owning all of his crime. What was happening? The fences were coming down and mercy was flooding in. And once he was released from prison, he then went and visited Assunta Goretti, whose daughter he took from her. And as a result, she couldn't even attend her daughter's funeral because she had to care for her 5 other children that she ultimately couldn't care for because she had to put them up for adoption because she couldn't till the farm and take care of the children. She lost everything. And all these years later, he knocks on her door, he drops to his knees, and he begs for forgiveness. And having received it, he goes on to care for her for several years until he eventually becomes a Capuchin friar, all the way until the day he died. And in this, what we see him doing is living the redemption that Paul talked about in the second reading, when for him, life got real simple. He said, "To me, life is Christ and death is gain. If I go on living in the flesh, that means fruitful labor for me. Yet I long to depart to be with Christ." That's amazing. That is amazing that Alessandro got to that point. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised at all if his own cause for canonization was opened. But all of that comes as a direct result of him simply letting God love him, because that is the power of God's mercy. And it's the same mercy that is available to us now and always. But we have to seek it. And it's available to us, particularly in the sacrament of confession. So go. Have the courage to go. Do not be afraid, because God's ways are not our ways. And thank God for it.